Picture this. You're standing in Central Park. The sun filters through the trees. People jog past. Lovers walk hand in hand. Kids laugh as they chase each other on the grass. You hear music drifting through the air, distant horse carriages clattering down the paths, the city just beyond the park's edge. Everything feels timeless, peaceful, idyllic. But beneath your feet, literally beneath the soil, lie the traces of a neighborhood that was wiped off the map. A thriving black community that owned land, built churches and schools, raised children, and dared to dream of a stable future in a country that treated them as expendable. A community that the city decided didn't fit into its vision of beauty and progress. So they erased it. They didn't just bulldoze homes, they dismantled a story, and they buried it beneath one of the most famous parks in the world, Seneca Village. Most people who walk through Central Park today have no idea they're walking over the remnants of homes, over foundations still buried in the earth, over the resting places of people who lived, worked, and built here nearly 2 centuries ago. It wasn't lost by accident. It was erased on purpose. The story of Seneca Village forces us to ask a chilling question. How many beautiful places were built on top of someone else's destruction? What did New York gain? And what did it deliberately destroy to create the city we see today? This is not just a story about the past. It's a story about power, about who gets remembered and who is buried, literally and figuratively. So tonight, we're going to peel back the park's manicured lawns and winding trails to expose what lies beneath, the rise and the burning of Seneca Village, how it was built, how it thrived, and how it was buried beneath the myth of progress. To understand Seneca Village, you have to imagine New York City not as a metropolis of skyscrapers, but as a young, uneven city still figuring itself out. In the early 1820s, the center of urban life was far downtown. The land above 59th Street was considered undesirable. It was rocky, marshy in places, dotted with small farms, wooded patches, and scattered settlements. The city's wealthier residents saw little value in it. But for people with few options, free black New Yorkers, working-class immigrants, it represented a rare chance at independence. In 1825, a man named Andrew Williams made a choice that would set history in motion. He was a 25-year-old African-American shoe shiner who decided to buy 3 lots of land from John Whitehead, a white landowner looking to sell parcels in the area. This was more than a real estate transaction. For a black man in 1825, land ownership was radical. Just 2 years later, in 1827, slavery would finally be abolished in New York, but racism would remain deeply entrenched. Black men could only vote if they owned at least $250 in property. A racist legal barrier meant to limit political power. Buying land meant buying a voice. It meant staking a claim in a society that wanted to deny him one. Williams wasn't alone. Over the next decade, other black families began purchasing plots of land. Names like Lyons, Wilson, Johnson, families who worked as laborers, carpenters, domestic workers, shoemakers, and tradesmen. Some saved for years just to afford a single lot. Others bought multiple parcels, hoping to pass them on to their children. By the 1830s and 1840s, what began as a handful of lots had grown into a community, Seneca Village. Roughly 2/3 of its residents were black, many of them landowners, a staggering fact in an era where black property ownership was rare and often violently opposed. The rest were largely Irish and German immigrants, also seeking affordable land away from the crowded and hostile downtown. Seneca Village represented something fragile and precious, a space of relative autonomy, a place where Black New Yorkers could build their lives without constant harassment, without having to constantly justify their right to exist. Land meant stability. It meant identity. It meant they were no longer just renting corners of other people's property. They were planting roots in the earth itself. And those roots, as we'll see, would be deliberately torn up. To really understand what was lost, we have to imagine Seneca Village not as an abstract community, but as a living, breathing place. Walk with me in your mind down a dirt path cutting between modest but well-kept wooden houses. It's a summer day in the 1850s. The sound of children's laughter echoes between homes. There are gardens planted with vegetables and herbs, collards, beans, squash, rows carefully tended by families who take pride in their land. You can hear roosters crowing in the distance, goats grazing, women hanging clothes on lines stretched between fences. The air smells clean, far cleaner than the disease-ridden, overcrowded downtown tenements. Fresh water flows from natural springs. This matters because cholera and yellow fever regularly tore through New York's poor neighborhoods. Here, in Seneca Village, residents were healthier, their environment safer. At the heart of the community are its churches: the African Union Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, and All Angels Church. These aren't just Sunday spaces. They are the anchors of the village. They serve as schools, meeting halls, places of worship, and community defense. At a time when New York's public education system ignored Black children, these churches provide literacy, arithmetic, history. Children are learning to read and write in an era when so many people, Black and white alike, are denied education. Some residents are abolitionists, quietly connected to wider networks fighting against slavery. Others are craftsmen who bring skill and pride to their work. There are families who own multiple lots, families who've begun to build intergenerational wealth, a concept almost unimaginable for most Black Americans at the time. There's also a sense of safety. Seneca Village is far enough from the bustling downtown that its residents are shielded from some of the daily harassment Black people face. Newspapers of the time barely mention the community except to disparage it. But among the residents themselves, there's a shared sense of identity, of resilience. This wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a statement, a quiet, everyday act of defiance against a world designed to keep them powerless. Their homes may have been humble, but they represented something enormous: the ability to claim a future on their own terms. While Seneca Village grew, New York City itself was transforming. By the early 1850s, its population had exploded. Wealthy elites, many of whom lived downtown or in newly fashionable neighborhoods, began to see the uptown land in a new way. The city was becoming crowded, noisy, and full of working-class immigrants who frightened the upper classes. So they began to dream of something grand: a park. Not just any park, a vast, European-style urban oasis to rival the royal gardens of Paris or London. Writers like William Cullen Bryant and landscape designers like Andrew Jackson Downing advocated for a park that would bring culture and order to the city. But beneath the rhetoric of public good was something more calculated. A large park would raise surrounding property values. It would give the wealthy a place to promenade, to be seen, to enjoy leisure away from the undesirable masses. And crucially, the land they wanted was already occupied. The proposed site stretched from 59th to 106th Street, encompassing several small settlements. The largest, most stable, and most visible was Seneca Village. But to the park's advocates, that didn't matter. They began portraying the area in newspapers as a wasteland, a swampy, lawless, filthy district full of squatters and criminals. They called Seneca Village a shanty town, ignoring the fact that most residents were legal property owners. They ignored the churches, the gardens, the schools. This wasn't oversight, it was propaganda. To clear the land, they first had to erase the community in the public's imagination. In 1853, the New York State Legislature passed the Central Park Act, granting the city eminent domain, the legal power to seize private land for public use. The law required compensation, but compensation was often far below market value. Wealthy planners called the park progress. The newspapers echoed their language, and slowly, public opinion shifted to accept the destruction of Seneca Village as inevitable, even beneficial. What wasn't said out loud but everyone understood was this: Central Park would not be built for the people of Seneca Village. It would be built for the people who wanted Seneca Village gone. By the mid-1850s, the fate of Seneca Village was sealed. The city had the legal authority. The newspapers had done their work. The park planners had the backing of powerful men. All that was left was to clear the land. For some families, this meant forced sales of their property at unfair prices. Many protested, filing petitions and lawsuits to demand higher compensation, but most were ignored. Others refused to leave, clinging to the homes they had built with their own hands. Imagine the fear, the rage, the helplessness of watching uniformed officers arrive at your door with orders to remove you. There are recorded accounts of people being dragged from their homes. Police broke down doors. Houses were demolished as residents wept. Churches were torn apart. The African Union Church's burial ground was disturbed, bodies disinterred, often without dignity or proper reburial. And while this destruction was happening, newspapers mocked the residents, calling them squatters, vagrants, obstacles to progress. By 1857, the evictions were complete. Seneca Village was gone, its buildings flattened, its people scattered. Some moved uptown, some disappeared into the working-class neighborhoods of Harlem. Some were lost entirely to the historical record. And the land they had saved for, built on, invested their lives in, became the foundation for Central Park. The park's creators reshaped the landscape, erasing all visible traces of the community. Hills were leveled, streams rerouted, topsoil shifted. The entire world they'd built vanished beneath paths and lawns and ornamental lakes. What makes this story even more devastating is that it worked. For generations, New Yorkers grew up believing the park had been built on empty land, that no one lived here, that there was nothing of value to lose. That was the goal all along. For over a century, Seneca Village existed only as a ghost in forgotten paperwork. Central Park became a symbol of New York itself, a place of beauty, leisure, and class. No one walking its winding paths was told about the community buried beneath them. School children were taught that this was empty land, transformed into something great. But in the late 20th century, cracks began to appear in that story. Historians digging through old property records started to notice something: deeds, tax records, legal disputes that told a different story. Seneca Village wasn't a shanty town, it was a thriving community of homeowners. Archaeologists and historians began to piece it together. In 1992, a group of scholars formally began pushing to research and recognize the site. In 2011, archaeological excavations unearthed fragments of everyday life. porcelain dishes, children's toys, cooking utensils, a shoe sole, fragments of glass, a crucifix, tools. These weren't random artifacts. They were the fingerprints of a community, proof that the people of Seneca Village had lived lives as ordinary and meaningful as anyone else. Their presence had been buried, but not erased completely. As their story came to light, a larger pattern emerged. Seneca Village was not an isolated case. Across the United States, prosperous black communities were displaced in the name of progress. Freedmen's towns in Texas were bulldozed for highways. Rosewood in Florida was burned to the ground. The Greenwood district in Tulsa, Black Wall Street, was bombed and razed in 1921. The erasure of Seneca Village fit into a centuries-long pattern of black land dispossession. In 2001, New York finally installed a plaque in Central Park acknowledging the history of Seneca Village. It's a small marker for such a large story, but it's a start. The excavation and research didn't just uncover artifacts, it uncovered something bigger, a reckoning with how history is written and who gets left out of it. Seneca Village isn't just a story about the past. It's a story about how power works. Central Park is beautiful. It's iconic. But it's also a monument to erasure. Every step across its lawns, every photo taken at its bridges, every quiet stroll through its trees happens on the land of people who were deliberately pushed aside. Andrew Williams, the Lyons family, the Wilsons, the Irish and German immigrants who joined them. They were not squatters, they were homeowners, community builders, dreamers, and their story was buried under a narrative of progress written by people with more money and louder voices. But history, no matter how deeply buried, leaves traces in old deeds, in bones, in foundations beneath the soil, in the stories passed down. Their erasure was meant to be total, but it wasn't. Today, their story is finally resurfacing. When you walk through Central Park now, remember this. You're walking over homes, over gardens, over churches, over lives, and this isn't unique to New York. Across the country, the story of Seneca Village repeats in different forms, in different cities. Black land ownership challenged white power structures, and so time and time again, those structures crushed it. But stories like this refuse to stay buried forever. They rise up through the cracks. What other stories lie beneath the places we walk every day? What neighborhoods were erased to build the icons we now celebrate? History isn't just written by the victors, it's buried by them. But we can dig it up. We can speak their names. We can make sure their lives aren't lost to silence. What did you think about today's video? Comment your thoughts and suggestions for my next video below. And if this story resonated with you, remember, the past isn't gone. It's right beneath our feet.